In the suffocating humidity of Quang Tri Province, 1968, the jungle breathed like a living thing. Every leaf shimmered with sweat. Every shadow could hide a rifle barrel. And every sound, every click, every whisper could mean death. The Vietnam War had turned this once quiet province into a brutal chessboard of survival. But somewhere between the thunder of artillery and the rattle of AK-47s, a strange silence began to spread. It wasn't peace, it was precision. Marines in the field started whispering about it. Stories of a man who could kill without a sound. A ghost who turned the jungle against the enemy. They said his rifle didn't bark like the others. It whispered. And when it whispered, men fell. That man was Corporal Elijah Eli Booker, a U.S. Marine sniper from Detroit, Michigan. A quiet, sharp-eyed mechanic before the war, and one of the very few African-American snipers deployed in Vietnam. But history didn't remember him for the color of his skin. It remembered him for the weapon he built from junk. A silencer made out of tin cans that turned the battlefield on its head. Eli's story wasn't written in the official records. The Marine Corps didn't issue silenced rifles. And back then, a field modification like his bordered on mutiny. But in the thick of the jungle, orders blurred with survival. Booker's invention became legend among his unit, and nightmare among the Viet Cong. Before we get to how a handful of tin cans changed the war in Quang Tri, we need to understand the man behind them. Elijah Booker grew up on Detroit's East Side in the 1940s, a neighborhood shaped by factories, jazz clubs, and the hum of post-war America. His father was a mechanic at Ford's River Rouge plant, his mother a schoolteacher who used to read him stories about Tuskegee pilots and their courage under fire. Booker's world was one of machines, motion, and discipline. By 17, he could strip and rebuild an engine faster than most adults. He had a steady hand, a patient eye, and a fascination with how things worked. When the draft came for Vietnam, Booker didn't run. He volunteered for the Marines. "If I'm going to fight," he told his father, "I want to be trained by the best." He entered boot camp at Paris Island, where his marksmanship quickly drew attention. In a time when racial tension still ran deep through America and the military, Booker's skill forced people to look past prejudice, at least on the rifle range. He didn't talk much. He didn't brag. He just hit every target they gave him. Every time, by 1968, Booker found himself in Quang Tri, near the demilitarized zone, a harsh, unforgiving front where North Vietnamese army units moved like shadows through the dense forest. Quang Tri wasn't just another battlefield. It was one of the bloodiest corners of the entire war. Fog rolled in every morning like smoke from the earth itself, and the jungle floor was soaked in rain and fear. Booker was attached to a recon platoon tasked with scouting enemy supply routes, often operating deep behind enemy lines. The work demanded silence, but there was one problem. The M40 sniper rifle he carried, though deadly accurate, was loud enough to wake the dead. The crack of each shot echoed across valleys, giving away position after position. Every pull of the trigger meant seconds before counterfire rained down. And then came the night that changed everything. His team had been ambushed during a recon mission. Pinned down behind a fallen tree, Booker watched the muzzle flashes dance through the dark. The radio was dead, their ammo running low. He lined up a shot, took down 1, 2, 3 attackers, but the enemy kept circling. The rifle's thunder was a beacon, calling death closer with every shot. Somewhere in that chaos, something snapped inside him. Not fear, but focus. He realized that if he couldn't make his rifle quieter, they wouldn't make it home. When dawn came, Booker's squad limped back to base. 3 men wounded, 2 missing. That night, while others cleaned their weapons or wrote letters home, Booker went to work in the maintenance shed. He scavenged old oil filters, aluminum tubing, and the tin cans from the rations nobody liked. Using a hammer, wire, and the kind of precision only born mechanics have, He began crafting a crude suppressor, a tin can silencer, as the men later called it. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't regulation, but when he mounted it to the barrel of his M40, the next test shot sounded like a whisper, a muted pop swallowed by the jungle. At first, his commanding officer called it Booker's suicide toy. But when Booker took out an enemy spotter without alerting a single guard during a live mission, the same officer started calling it standard equipment. Word spread fast. Marines began asking Booker to build them one. The workshop became his laboratory. Canned fruit tins, old motor parts, bits of radio casing, all became tools of survival. It was improvisation born out of desperation, and it worked. But beyond the genius of his invention, what made Elijah Booker remarkable was his mindset. To him, the silence wasn't about killing, it was about control. He once told a friend, "Noise makes fear. Silence makes them think you're everywhere." In a war defined by helicopters and explosions, Booker brought something entirely different. Calm, calculated terror, the kind that made the enemy afraid to breathe. As the weeks went by, reports began surfacing of North Vietnamese patrols refusing to move through certain areas after sunset. They called it the Whispering Jungle. To them, it wasn't a man, it was a spirit. To the Marines, it was one of their own, working alone in the shadows. But the truth of Booker's silencer, and the missions that followed, would remain buried for decades, sealed under layers of bureaucracy and silence as thick as the jungle itself. And yet, the few who served with him remembered. They told stories over beers and reunions, stories about how one black Marine with a mechanic's mind and a rifle that whispered changed how they fought, survived, and thought about war itself. This is the story of Elijah Booker, the man who made the jungle go silent. Booker's invention spread like wildfire through the platoon. At first, it was just him and his rifle, his whisper. But soon, a handful of Marines started carrying versions of it, each one uniquely built from the scraps and debris of war. Tin cans from ration packs, bits of copper pipe from old generators, even the sleeves of spent artillery shells. None of it looked official. Yet, in the humid nightmare of Quang Tri, official didn't matter. Effective did. On most days, the Marines of Charlie Company patrolled through terrain that looked almost alive. The vines, the trees, the smell of rot. It all wrapped around them like a living organism. And somewhere within that mess, Booker would slip into position, a shadow among shadows. He never said much before a mission. He just checked his rifle, wrapped the makeshift silencer tight, and disappeared. There was one operation in particular that made his legend explode across the province. Operation Medina, October 1968. The Marines were moving to cut off a network of Viet Cong supply trails near the Hai Lang forest, a labyrinth of tunnels and ambush sites. Intelligence warned of heavy resistance. The unit needed eyes ahead, someone who could scout without alerting the enemy. Booker volunteered. The night before the mission, the rain came down so hard it drowned out their own thoughts. Booker cleaned his rifle by the dim light of a Zippo. One of the younger Marines, barely 19, asked him if he was scared. Booker smiled faintly. "Son," he said, "you only hear fear when you let it make noise." He slipped into the forest hours before sunrise. By dawn, the rest of the platoon followed, moving through the wet green silence, guided by faint marks he'd left on the trees. And then, nothing. No gunfire, no radio chatter, just the sound of rain. When they finally reached the coordinates Booker had scouted, they found 20 enemy bodies, each killed with a single shot, each still gripping their rifles. None of the others had heard a thing. To this day, veterans who were there still talk about that morning. The air was so still it felt like time had stopped. One Marine swore he could hear the bullet casings land on the leaves. Another said it was like The jungle itself was doing the shooting. After that mission, the higher-ups couldn't ignore Booker anymore. A colonel from Division Command called him in, wanted to know what this tin can contraption was all about. Booker laid it on the table. It looked absurd. A piece of metal tubing, wrapped with wire and cloth, its edges blackened with soot. But when the colonel saw the results on the field reports, confirmed kills, 0 detection, he didn't laugh. He just told Booker to keep doing whatever he was doing, but not everyone approved. Some officers saw Booker's silencer as disobedience, a challenge to the chain of command. There were even whispers that military intelligence wanted to confiscate his weapon, to study it for potential design use. Booker refused. That rifle was his, built with his hands, born out of necessity. He told them, "You can study it when the war's over." His resourcefulness became the talk of every forward base, from Hu to Khe Sanh. Mechanics, engineers, and snipers tried replicating his idea, but none quite matched his original design. His version used layers of tin separated by oil-soaked cloth, creating multiple chambers that trapped gas and reduced sound. Primitive, yes, but incredibly effective. In modern terms, it was an early example of baffle design, the same principle used in advanced suppressors decades later. But Booker's talent wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. He understood the enemy's fear. The Viet Cong relied heavily on hearing to detect approaching units. When that sense was taken away, when their comrades began dropping silently, they panicked. They fired into the trees, wasting ammunition, exposing their positions. Booker exploited that. He'd fire once, move, and fire again from another angle. The enemy started calling him the Silent Ghost. In the villages, rumors spread fast. Some said he was invisible. Others said he used special ghost bullets. A few believed he was a spirit of vengeance. The Marines didn't correct them. The myth worked better than any weapon. Booker's quiet demeanor only added to the legend. He didn't celebrate his kills. He didn't keep score. His only ritual was polishing the rifle every night and replacing the outer tin whenever it warped from heat. He knew his invention wouldn't last forever. It was fragile, disposable. But that didn't matter. For him, it was proof that ingenuity could outthink even the most powerful war machine. The other Marines began learning from him. He showed them how to read wind from the way leaves trembled, how to measure distance using only the sound of rainfall. But his biggest lesson was always the same. Don't fight the jungle. Make it your ally. Interesting thing. Years later, military researchers studied his field modifications after a few of his silencers were recovered. They discovered that his design, though made from scrap, actually reduced rifle noise by nearly 70 decibels, almost identical to some of the earliest officially produced suppressors used by the CIA and MACV SOG teams. Yet Booker had built his without blueprints, without schematics, without permission. And there's another detail most people never knew. Booker's silencer not only quieted the rifle, it changed the tone. Normally, a sniper rifle's crack can be traced by triangulating the sharp echo. But his handmade suppressor scattered that sound in multiple directions. It confused enemy spotters, making it nearly impossible to locate the shooter. To them, the shots came from everywhere and nowhere. In military reports, this psychological confusion showed results. Enemy ambushes dropped in frequency. Patrols moved slower. Recon squads started venturing deeper with confidence. Even air units flying over Quang Tri mentioned that enemy movements appeared disorganized in Booker's zone of operation. One Marine commander wrote in his logbook, "Booker's silence is worth more than 1,000 bullets." Still, for all his contributions, Booker rarely appeared in official reports by name. Back then, recognition for African American soldiers was scarce, especially for unconventional acts that didn't fit military procedure. Many of his missions were classified or buried under other names. But among the men who served with him, no one forgot. Decades later, some of those same men, gray-haired now, their voices cracking with memory, told journalists and historians about the black sniper with the tin can rifle. Their stories were consistent, real, vivid. They remembered his calm, his focus, the way he would listen to the jungle before taking a shot, as if waiting for the forest itself to tell him when to pull the trigger. They also remembered the last time they saw him. It was late '68. During a sweep near the Lavang River, Booker went out with a two-man recon team. They radioed in once, reporting movement. Then, nothing. Days later, search teams found the bodies of the two Marines. Booker's rifle was missing. His silencer lay in the mud, bent and burned. He was never found. Some said he'd been captured. Others believed he'd vanished deeper into the jungle, living off the land. But among the men who'd heard his rifle whisper in the night, they preferred another story, that Elijah Booker had become what the enemy feared most, a ghost that never stopped watching. And to this day, in the thick jungles of Quang Tri, veterans say that on quiet nights, when the wind dies and the rain holds its breath, you can still hear the faint pop of a rifle somewhere deep in the dark. Years later, long after the helicopters had left and the jungle began swallowing the remnants of war, the story of Elijah Eli Booker refused to die. Veterans swapped his legend like a campfire secret, each retelling shaded with awe and disbelief. But somewhere buried beneath the myth was a man, one whose silence spoke louder than gunfire. For decades, no one knew what had truly happened to him. His name never appeared on any confirmed KIA lists, nor on the official roster of those missing in action. It was as if the war had simply erased him. But in 1989, a U.S. construction team working on a memorial site near the Lavang River uncovered a corroded rifle wrapped in cloth, its barrel modified with the remains of a tin and wire suppressor. The serial number was faint, but it matched the M40 assigned to Corporal Elijah Booker. Inside the cloth was also something unexpected, a small, oil-stained notebook. Most of the pages had been ruined by rain and time, but a few words remained legible. Scrawled in grease pencil, they read, "The jungle listens before it speaks." The find reignited the legend. Military historians tried piecing together his service record, but the trail was fragmented, lost in the haze of unofficial missions and incomplete reports. Some speculated that Booker had been attached to a covert Marine recon program. Others believed he'd been recruited by Viet Cong for classified sniper operations deep into Laos and Cambodia, places where silence was more valuable than ammunition. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear: Booker's invention had left a mark. By the 1970s, the U.S. military began experimenting with standardized suppressors for sniper rifles. Small, compact devices that used multi-baffle designs almost identical to Booker's field model. In fact, one engineer who worked on those early prototypes later admitted, off record, that they had heard rumors about a Marine in Quang Tri who built one out of ration tins. Whether they copied it or merely stumbled onto the same physics, Booker's fingerprint was there, in every whisper that followed. But beyond technology, Booker's legacy was human. His story became a quiet symbol among African-American veterans who'd fought two wars at once, one in the jungle and one within their own country's prejudice. In interviews years later, fellow Marines recalled how Booker never demanded respect. He earned it. He didn't talk about race, one said. He talked about skill. If you couldn't shoot, you listened to him. If you could, you tried to keep up. Booker's calm precision saved countless lives, not through brute force, but through intellect and ingenuity. He had turned scraps into survival, fear into focus, and silence into strength. In 2002, a small museum in Quantico received the recovered M40 rifle for restoration. Experts cleaned the rust, preserved the fragile remains of the silencer, and displayed it under a simple plaque: Improvised Suppressed Rifle. Quang Tri, 1968. Builder unknown. But the veterans who saw it knew exactly whose hands had built it. They left quiet notes beside the glass. Some wrote Semper Fi. Others, "Thank you, brother." And one, scrawled in shaky handwriting, simply said, "Eli." The jungle still remembers, even today. Historians debate how much of Booker's story is fact and how much has been mythologized. But if war teaches anything, it's that myths often begin with truth. There were too many witnesses, too many after-action reports describing the same impossible detail. Enemy soldiers dropping without sound, patrols vanishing into terror, and a single marksman who fought not with volume, but with absence. And that silence, that unnerving, deadly quiet, became part of the landscape itself. You see, silence in war is not the absence of noise. It's the sound of control, of mastery. It's the pause between life and death, where only one man decides which side wins. Elijah Booker understood that better than anyone. He once told a young Marine, "Noise is for men who want to be noticed. Silence is for men who want to survive." He wasn't trying to be a hero. He wasn't chasing medals. He was trying to give his brothers a few more seconds to live. After his disappearance, his unit changed the way they fought. They began moving slower, quieter. They used sound as a weapon, creating confusion and deception. Booker's influence lingered long after his body was gone. His silence had become part of their instinct. And, in a strange way, part of the jungle's own rhythm. There's a haunting detail one veteran shared during an interview in 1994. He said he'd returned to Vietnam for closure, visiting the same valley where Booker vanished. He brought along an old M40 replica, and as he stood among the trees, the wind died. For a brief moment, the forest was utterly still. Not even the insects buzzed. He swore he could feel eyes watching him. And then, just for an instant, he heard it. That same soft pop. One shot, no echo, no source, just silence swallowing sound. He froze, then smiled. "Guess he's still out here," he whispered. The story of Elijah Booker isn't just about a weapon. It's about creativity born from necessity. It's about how one man's mind, armed with little more than scrap metal and determination, could outsmart both the enemy and the limits of his own army's imagination. It's about the unseen battles within war, the fight to be heard, to be respected, and, paradoxically, to remain unseen. Today, modern sniper teams train with equipment that owes much to men like him, field innovators who redefined what was possible. Every time a suppressed rifle fires in silence, somewhere between that muffled thump and the breath that follows, there's an echo. Faint, but present, of Booker's invention. And perhaps that's fitting, because Booker never wanted fame. He wanted silence. He trusted it. He built it. And in the end, he became it. In the quiet jungles of Quang Tri, where rusted shells still sleep beneath the soil and vines crawl over forgotten helmets, maybe the wind still carries a memory of a man who turned noise into nothing and fear into silence, because history doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers.